Okay. I understand that Dr. Umar is stating that he is a relative of Frederick Douglass, but the Bailey family has repeatedly came out and said that he is not a relative of Frederick Douglass, and in fact that his father did a DNA test and it was proven that he is not a relative of Frederick Douglass. So why does he continue with the rhetoric of that, saying that he's a relative of Frederick Douglass?
These trolls who think it matters to me at all, if they try to undermine the truth of who I am, is going to mean something to me, and it doesn't. I'm going to do the work regardless of what they believe in or not. Even if I wasn't related to Frederick Douglass, it wouldn't have any effect on the work that I'm doing. It's such a useless conversation. Now, the question of reparations. I support reparations. The Honorable Marcus Garvey is the father of modern reparations, but I have some issues with it. The first issue is I haven't seen us address the internal reparations that we owe to ourselves. Queen Mother, we have to be honest about something. Many of the problems that affect the global African family cannot be solved with money. I want to say that again. Many of the problems that affect the global African family cannot be solved with money. You're not going to solve self-hatred with money. You're not going to solve the mistrust between different African families with money. You're not going to solve tribalism with money. So where is the internal reparations package, which is what we owe to our ancestors, ourselves, and the Most High? Now, as it relates to external reparations, quickly, Queen Mother, number one, I don't see enough conversation about the psychological cost that slavery and colonialism wrought on the African psyche. Nobody's talking about the psychological damage. We must quantify the psychological damage, because I am of the opinion that the psychological cost of the Ma'afa and colonization in Africa is worth far more than the physical labor. It's worth far more than the stolen resources from the ground. We must calculate the psychological cost. Number two, I hear too much conversation about a cash payout, Queen Mother. I don't want no cash. I want wealth. I want resources. I want capital. Because if we get the wealth and the resources and the capital, we don't need money. We can make our own. Number three, at the top of the reparations list must be the retaking of control for all African intellectual property and inventions. If Africans invented it, if Africans created it, it must be returned to us, i.e., African music. Music in America is the second largest export industry. What if we owned Michael Jackson's music as part of the reparations settlement? What if we owned Whitney Houston's music as part of the reparations settlement? What if we owned the Notorious B.I.G. and Tupac and Prince's music as part of the reparations settlement? The music alone would give us all the operating capital that we need. We're not thinking deep enough about reparations, Queen Mother. Most of us are thirsty for a check, and that is a trap.
Thank you so much. And I have never heard it put in such eloquent terms. And I want to thank you so much for doing that. We have a caller on the line. Caller, state your name, your first name, and where you're calling from, and your question, please.
Okay, thank you. Hi, my name is Veronica, and I'm from Baltimore, Maryland. Okay. I understand that Dr. Umar is stating that he is a relative of Frederick Douglass, but the Bailey family has repeatedly came out and said that he is not a relative of Frederick Douglass, and in fact that his father did a DNA test and it was proven that he is not a relative of Frederick Douglass. So why does he continue with the rhetoric of that, saying that he's a relative of Frederick Douglass?
I'm going to answer that.
Okay. Yeah.
And for your knowledge, Queen Mother, these ridiculous troll type questions have been posed to me for years, and that's why I smile. I would challenge the caller to show me a letter from the Bailey family that says I am not a blood relative of Frederick Douglass. Show me a letter that says my 4 times great-grandfather, Stephen Henry Bailey, who is buried in the old Denton Cemetery in Maryland, who is named by Frederick Douglass in his autobiography, is not his first cousin and half-brother by way of the slave master. Show me a letter from the family. You can't. And then I want you to ask the family, if he's not related to Frederick Douglass, why is his name and his daughter's name on the family tree? Because we did not put it there. So although I appreciate the negativity, at the same time, I get tired of answering the same questions over and over and over again. Frederick Douglass is my 4 times great-grand cousin. He was first cousin to my 4 times great-grandfather, and possibly his half-brother by way of the slave master. Those are facts. They are indisputed, and I challenge you to bring me paperwork stating otherwise.
Well, I would like to say, I did do my DNA, and people have been, they've been telling me, oh, you're not African. I did my DNA, and my DNA came back saying that I was 98% African. And they're like, how could that be if you are an ADOS, an African descendant of a slave? I'm like, my grandmother must have came over in that last slave ship. And it was interesting because that was one of the things, the stories that they used to tell us, because, our stories are passed down just by words. We didn't have anything written, unfortunately. And so we're told the stories from our forefathers and from our grandmothers. And I remember my grandmother saying that, she'd always tell the story that, my grandmother, not my great grandmother, my grandmother's mother she came over one of the last slave ships. And so when I got my DNA results back, my family was like, no, there's no way. And everyone I tell this, there's no way. I'm like, oh, there's definitely a way. I said, so now those stories are real. She was probably from one of those last slave ships, had not gotten raped and mutilated by a white man. So I embrace my 98% African, and I truly believe that that's what I am and who I am. So I
in my
want to also,
situation, Queen Mother, there's people within the Bailey family who do not agree with me politically. They are not Pan-Africanists. I'm not speaking for the entire family. It's a very large one. But they don't agree with me, principle or otherwise. They're not Garveyites. They're not Pan-Africanists. And so some of them have attempted to distance me from the family, which is fine. I could care less. I don't plan on going to another family reunion as long as I live for that reason. But they can't, you will never hear them say he's not related to Frederick Douglass, because they know that I am. What they try to say is that I've claimed to be a descendant. I've never claimed to be a descendant, meaning I come directly from Frederick Douglass's loin, which I do not. My 4 times great-grandfather is not Frederick Douglass. My 4 times great-grandfather is Stephen Henry Bailey, the cousin of Frederick Douglass, and I've been extremely clear in articulating that through the years. But these trolls who think it matters to me at all, if they try to undermine the truth of who I am, is going to mean something to me, and it doesn't. I'm going to do the work regardless of what they believe in or not. Even if I wasn't related to Frederick Douglass, it wouldn't have any effect on the work that I'm doing. It's such a useless conversation.
well, thank you. We have another caller. We have about 7 more minutes. I think we can get in 2 more calls. Caller, could you please quickly state your name and where you're calling from and your question, please?
Hi, thank you. This is Kenesha Campbell from Patterson, California. Thank you for taking my call. I actually have a comment, then a question. So first off, my comment. Dr. Umar, I'm a huge fan and listen to your interviews often. I just wanted to say personally that I've heard much of the criticism and questions and such that are often posed to you, and I find them disappointing and a distraction. I personally am impressed, motivated, and so proud of your lifelong focus to our children. And so I just wanted to put that out there particularly in response to the most recent question posed about your lineage. So I just wanted to say that. My question is, with both of you, Dr. Butler and Dr. Johnson, with a lifelong focus towards our children, Black children in particular, is there room for a collaboration
between
either here in America or abroad?
Oh, absolutely. At least, you know, speaking for myself, the Frederick Douglass and Marcus Garvey Academy ultimately seeks to be a Pan-African school district globally. I want a school in every country, every community, every state, every nation. We don't have a vision of 1 or 2 schools in Wilmington, Delaware. That's where we will begin the operation, but we do not seek to end it there. I have 2 goals before I leave this planet: to put Frederick Douglass Marcus Garvey Academies all over the world, to be the superintendent for that. But then I also want to say this, and for all my African continental brothers and sisters who are watching, and I've put this offer out there before, it has not yet been accepted. And to me, that is more of a mark against African leadership than it is against me. I have offered to assist any African nation and as many African nations who desire to help transform their ministries of education. I would love to be part of a ministry of education on the African continent to help birth this intellectual African renaissance that our children need. But to date, I have not heard from a single ministry of education from any African country. And I know part of that is because they consider me to be a bit too revolutionary and that I might wrinkle the feathers of some of their European financial sponsors. But that is still out there. I want to be Minister of Education for an African nation, along with Superintendent for the Global Pan-African School District.
Oh, we have to see what we can do about that, because we have to get you more entrenched in the continent, and I definitely would like for you to work with me on some of the things I'm doing there, and we can go into that a little bit later. But now on this show, we have one more caller, so we'll get this one last call, and then we'll go on and let you close it off. Caller, please state your name and where you're calling from. And I want to thank that last caller also as well. Thank you so much, and that was. I really liked what the comment that they made as far as the lineage, and that's great. So, caller, please state your name and where you're calling from.
April from Baltimore, Maryland. Okay, so basically I'm Liberian American, and I know the history of going back, and I know the history of Black people trying to come together. I know there was a light-skinned, dark-skinned conflict between J.J. Roberts and Edward Wilmot Blyden. And I know that there was bad blood brewing between the natives and the Americans. And I was wondering, like, how we're supposed to be Pan-Africans when it's always us versus them.
You are correct. I've been to Liberia. And you are correct that when the Americo-Liberians came, the descendants of the enslaved, when they returned to Liberia, many of them returned with a European consciousness. That is exactly what we're talking about. And they felt that because they had been socialized by the American white man, their slave masters, that they had a right to go to Africa and set themselves up as slave masters over our indigenous Liberian brothers and sisters, creating centuries of bad blood that still exists to this very day. Even in Liberia today, if you have an English last name, there's a certain degree of privilege associated with that versus having your indigenous African name. That stain is still there to this very day. And I believe that schism is still there to this very day. We see the same thing in Sierra Leone and in other places. That is why it is so important for those of us who are repatriationists that we don't just tell people to come back to Africa without finding out who exactly we are inviting back. You understand? So we got to be careful, because although I appreciate the love and the thirst to get back home and to live and to build, you have to be very careful about the type of diasporan African that you are letting into those countries, because we can cause more problems than we can solve. And I don't want to exaggerate this, nor do I want to make anybody paranoid, but I know the history, as you just stated. I know it well, and I learned even more of it while I was in Liberia, and I don't want to see that repeated. And the African psyche today is even worse than it was 200 years ago when they first set up when the American Colonization Society first started sending Africans back home to Africa. So we need to be careful with who we bring with us.
I had a black mother tell me to my face at a meeting one time at the school. She said, Dr. Umar, you don't know what you're talking about. My son has a reading disability, and I know he does because his daddy had a reading disability. I had a reading disability. My mama had a reading disability. His grandfather had a reading disability. She said, reading disabilities run in my family. I said, but let me tell you what runs in your family. Lazy ass parents run in your family. No homework running your family. No bedtime running your family. No reading running your family. That's what's running in your damn family. Underachievement and low expectations. Get your ass up out of my office.